Hello everybody, welcome back to You Can't Win. This is Tom here, and I'm joined by Don as usual, and today we're going to be talking about a few things that people have asked us to talk about here and there, and then we'll probably be getting into some questions as well. So the first thing that we've been asked to talk about a little bit is the American PSL and the Canadian CPC. These are two far-left socialist groups, and I think Donald had some things to say about that.
Yeah, so they're sort of similar in different ways. So the Communist Party in Canada is more analogous to the CPUSA, mainline kind of party, but the difference is that the CPUSA is kind of went pretty much, for a while at least, was all in on the Democrats, kind of. Like they were kind of more critical in theory, but they're very close to the DSA on that kind of stuff, really. Like in the last election, one of their leaders, they're very, very much ready to endorse Hillary pretty early kind of thing, right? Like they were sort of morphing into a left-wing pressure group instead of, like, that was kind of the theory behind it, that they were talking a lot about that kind of stuff. In Canada, they're much more, we are autonomous from the big parties. The people that sort of run it in Canada now are very, very much anti-NDP, like really don't like the social democratic movement here. And that puts them kind of ideologically close to people like PSL and WWP in the United States, where it's really much like, the two-party system needs to go and we need like a revolution. They're also kind of similar in terms of scale, where the CPUSA had thousands of members or around that because they had a lot of like older members that just kind of stuck on. And PSL and Communist Party of Canada are more like Cotter. They're more kind of like just, activists that are interested in building a revolutionary movement kind of thing. So anyways, my basic thing is that I really don't like their politics on most things. I really don't. I think they do like invaluable stuff around anti-war stuff, some of it, but outside of that, I don't know. There's just a lot of things that, like the defense of China kind of stuff, the defense of North Korea. I just don't, I think it's fine if it's like sort of, I don't know, somewhat ironic, but yeah, it's gone full sincerity kind of thing, like the new sincerity. And that's I can't really, I don't know.
I wonder why people aren't able to just, maybe it just doesn't work as like in terms of like a quick messaging kind of a thing, but is it that hard to articulate a position that's like, you don't have to go fully supportive of each possible target of like the United States or whatever?
Yeah,
you can just say like, we shouldn't attack anybody and just leave it at that. You don't have to say that everybody else out there is like 100% good or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't understand why that's so difficult for anybody to come up with that position, why it always has to swing so far in the other direction that you have to, like, I don't get that. So
in the PSL in the United States, their theory is very much close to that. In like, if they wrote out what they thought on these particular things, and probably a lot of their leadership still holds this kind of stuff, is that they think that China has a rightist leadership that will be inevitably overthrown by the working class and all that kind of stuff. Somewhere, like if you look at their old posts and all that kind of stuff, that's the kind of thing that they defend, or in their books about this kind of thing. They have like a short book about China that's their kind of take on it, is really that. And it's more like Sam Marcy, the sort of figurehead of this kind of movement in the past. His whole theory was kind of like, we need a death struggle with Stalinism at its heart kind of thing. Like, you need to take these battles straight to the middle of these parties and stuff, and right to the middle of these movements, and also then defend them from international intrigue and stuff, right? So it's more like, in theory, the logic is we're defending China against racist attacks and imperialism. But at the end of the day, we want the progressive factions within the Communist Party of China to change course or something, right? And that really has changed, I think, in the last few years in how people approach debates online. And it really is this sort of general sea change towards this kind of gotcha posting, where people kind of are saying, if you don't defend these countries, then you're like a racist or you're a imperialist and all that kind of stuff. It's like a gotcha kind of thing, where they're trying to really dig into people by saying, you think you can do socialism better than China or something, in ways that they would never in China, like the average member of the party would never defend it even. Like, it's not. And the actual party leaders in these parties tend to be saying things like, don't post that kind of stuff online, from what I've heard. And, they want some level of message control, but that doesn't trickle down to the rank and file kind of thing. I think a large part of the identity is things like Facebook groups. It really is that kind of thing where people create these little echo chambers where it's like the equivalent of the forums that we were used to, like the offshoots and stuff, where they just really create like a party line, and then anyone that deviates from that, it's proof that they're the exact opposite of whatever that identity is. So
yeah, it becomes pretty cultish pretty quickly, where it's about like the hierarchy internal to that little group more than it is anything that's actually pertinent to the outside world.
Yeah, I think that and then the other thing is that it's also this process of what they see in the prevailing culture is so, discordant from what they believe otherwise, that any sort of overlap between personal opportunities and, like any sort of like success in the broader culture is just immediately a sign of compromise. So if, they might agree with a politician on 90% of things, but they search out that 10% and then just really, really go hard on that. Now, I used to do that almost like half jokingly, half seriously on things, because it really does make me go crazy when I see people kind of endorsing things in a blanket way, when it's like if someone like, even like something like Bernie Sanders, I find it pretty hard to just get 100% excited about it kind of thing, right? Because it's like, I don't know, like a professional politician or something is just, I don't know, there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
But then it becomes this kind of proof in people's minds that you're already being absorbed into the system and co-opted, therefore you're a threat.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the attitudes that people have about like, oh, you think you can do socialism better than China, it kind of reminds me of when you see like an expat from Iran or Cuba or something like that, when they become super pro-democracy or whatever, and they support like every insane thing the United States does. Like they support every military action and they're waving the flag and stuff. And it's just like, you're crazier than any American about this stuff. Like you're going way hard, and it clearly has nothing to do with, it's about your own deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just seems like not a good way to appeal to like the majority of people. And I wonder if that's not even a real concern. If it's like, it doesn't matter. You've already kind of written off the majority of the population, and you're just happy being the correct minority or whatever.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that reminds me of a theory that the Soviets had in the 70s, where they said that like there's countries in Africa or, maybe parts of Latin America and stuff where there was no substantial urban, even like bourgeoisie. There wasn't like a large professional capitalist class or national capitalist class. And there wasn't really any working class. Like there might have been some, but it wasn't like really well developed. So a lot of the Marxist theories of change that they had shouldn't really have worked, right? So like they just, even if you wanted something to happen, you kind of had to think of some outside force that was going to guarantee it. So what they would say is that, well, the Soviet Union exists, so you can kind of like borrow the energy of the Soviet Union, like their proletariat kind of thing, right? Like their basis for a revolution, and the Soviet Union can back your local revolution, and therefore the Soviets can kind of sort of like underwrite your proletarian democracy kind of thing, right? Like it's like we can be the source of your power for radical change in your country. So it doesn't really matter as much that you don't have the basis for it in a narrow sense, because there's this worldwide movement. And I feel like, and that's kind of like a very diplomat kind of solution, right? Like it's very much like a foreign policy fudging Marxism to make it work kind of thing. And it also just by coincidence makes it so that trading with and getting arms from the Soviet Union is a great idea.
Yeah,
so you know what I mean? Like, and it's kind of like a too cute solution. And I think that that's how people operate with the existence of overseas powers that they support kind of thing. It's like, we're not actually a small group of people. We're a huge group of people. And we just happen to be the few thousand people in the United States that are part of this worldwide movement of billions of people. Yeah. And we're the ones that we've figured out the truth, and everyone else around us is pretty much a moron except for us. And we're the ones that are going to absorb sort of like the energy of China and then help translate that into anti-imperialism in the United States. So yeah, I think
Right.
it's very much that kind of thing, and that very much is the theory behind like Marxite kind of stuff. Like they call it, I think it's like global class war or something like that. Like it's this idea of that there is kind of this pole. It's very close to the Maoist third worldist kind of thing, except that they aren't as worried about the class side of it, and they're more worried about the states that are part of this coalition. So that's why they can kind of look at somewhere like Iran or, like Syria as part of this coalition in their minds kind of thing, because it really is it gets very, very close to sort of like a Mussolini idea of proletarian nations kind of thing, like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I guess if their position is that everyone else is a moron except for their group, I would say my position is that everyone is a moron, point blank. It's just we didn't figure anything else out either, so we're right there with everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something that they do invaluable work. The PSL and the CPC, they do invaluable work with anti-war stuff. Do you want to expand a little bit about that?
So the PSL and those kind of groups were really involved in the anti-war stuff during the Iraq War.
How did that turn out after all? Did that? Sorry.
No. But it was one of those things where, like, the people that called the demonstrations and stuff at a time when the mainstream of the Democratic Party were lining up behind the resolutions and stuff, right? So, and these protests happened before the war started. So a lot of them in the United Kingdom, the SWP really helped sort of bottom line the stop the war kind of stuff, alongside the sort of mainstream politicians like Corbyn and all that kind of stuff, where they, like, there's infrastructure there that activists can bring in points where the mainstream parties are not really doing as much. So, or actually leading the charge into war, like in the UK. So,
right.
You have to respect that kind of stuff. But
yeah, definitely. I do think that's really cool, and like you said, it's invaluable. I just wonder, like, how much socialist ideology actually is required for that sort of thinking, though, because I think a lot of people who might even like be overtly anti-communist, like they might go full on with the whole Black Book of Communism type thinking about things, could still be against the war. Like, actually, there's that whole anti-war strain of libertarianism, right? They had that website, anti-war, and obviously that has become pretty incoherent as time has gone on and everything. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to equate the two. I'm just saying that, I don't know. I just wonder if there's anything especially socialist about that. I mean, it's great that socialist groups took the charge on that, but I think that's one of those things that can appeal to a broad section of people without the whole economic ideology.
I think that the difference is number one, it's not necessarily like, you're right. It is a contingent fact, but it's also just, it happens to be true that those were the movements most willing to push for certain types of street protests that had certain types of mobilizations that you don't see from the right generally.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, if anything, the right has been much more willing to do that in the last 10 years as a result of that kind of stuff. Like, I mean, it's kind of in a strange way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't really until the mass anti-war protests that you started to see larger right-wing protests. So,
yeah.
And I think part of that, I mean, just to give a different example, which is it's not WWP, but it's more like, anarchists and ecologists and stuff, with stuff like Seattle and the different protests against the IMF and the G8 and all that. Yeah. Like, where that would not have happened if it wasn't for activists plus, the mainstream unions backing it in different ways. Like, and also, even Occupy Wall Street or something like that, where it at least showed people that there was a kernel of activism out there that was ready to be tapped by someone, or at least, like, I don't know. So even if it didn't actually produce particular outcomes, I think it's still positive to know that there's people out there that think that way or something, so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about Occupy Wall Street now that it's been several years? Like, I think at the time a lot of people were pretty excited about it, but also a little bit embarrassed. And I don't know. How do you feel about it? You feel that way, or?
No, I think it's it was positive in a lot of ways. And I even still think that the sort of attempts at creating movements without specific kind of demands and trying to move away from certain types of leadership, I think that was in response to the fact that mainstream leadership within different political movements just wasn't there and it wasn't effective. And I think that that's something that can be like, I mean, there is kind of a trendy kind of thing to say that that was sort of like the fatal flaw of the movement, that it couldn't transform into something revolutionary because it didn't have either one, like an organizational form, and two, it didn't have a political program.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's necessarily like a bad thing, that it like put a certain type of grievance and discourse onto the map. And the fact that a lot of movements were able to kind of build on that in different ways. And not just that, but also like Black Lives Matter and different things like that came out in the years after, in different sort of like independent protest movements. I don't think you would have been able to see sort of like the shift that happened with Trump's election and stuff and the kind of lead up to it, where there's very clearly like now just openly a lot of like, some of it's been channeled into more mainstream organizations like, you know, the Bernie Sanders movement and stuff. But there's still, it's especially just in the culture, you just see radical opinions are like commonplace now within at least online discourse and all that kind of stuff, where they tended to be a much smaller part of the overall share of debate and stuff before, I think. And there wasn't much response from the mainstream. Like, they tended to just be straightforward dismissive. But now I feel like there's certain kind of things that have become at least fashionable to say for more moderate candidates, you know, like there is that kind of push and pull where there wasn't really much of that. There wasn't as much in, say, like 2010 or so, you know?
Yeah. I think it sort of started some momentum where people felt like they were visible to like the political leadership or whatever, so that the politicians had to actually answer to some of those concerns, and they couldn't just act like it was, you know, a tiny section of crazies that thought this way or something. So that definitely seemed like a pretty good outcome for that.
I also think that there's also a change in how the confidence that people have now on the left, in the sort of far left of the elected mainstream kind of thing, you know, like the Bernie Sanders and AOC and all those people, the confidence in their voice is a lot different, I think. Because if you look at like 2014 or 2015, whenever Bernie launched his campaign, like, it was a very small, the actual first initial thing was just a very small announcement. And it was after he had already asked Warren to run, and she decided not to because she thought she would just get like slaughtered by.
I forgot about that. That's funny.
Yeah, so he kind of did it as a, well, someone has to do it, so I'll do it kind of thing, right? And he did get like pretty far, you know, but it was also kind of like, it still was at some level a foregone conclusion. And if you listen to him a lot during that campaign, he was still very much kind of like, I call it like Socratic grandpa kind of thing, where he was just like, why is it that billionaires have money or something, you know, kind of thing. And just kind of very much just asking broad questions to put them on the agenda. And the difference now is that I would say that the mainstream candidates, like the very, very centrist candidates in the Democratic debate, are doing that kind of thing now. Like, they're doing why is it there's so much wealth and so much poverty, and so that they'll say that kind of stuff and then have kind of moderate or centrist kind of solutions. So they're at that point. But then if you listen to Bernie now, it's a completely different message, really. Like, it's the same kind of policies, but he's saying things like there shouldn't be any billionaires, you know, just full voice for those kind of policies, plus the culture kind of side of it too, where he's obviously enjoying himself and he thinks that there's a chance that he could win, kind of thing, right? So the other part of that I think is interesting is that he's also at a point now with the kind of, you know, the confidence is that he's also boosting himself a lot. So almost everything that he, like any speech he gives, he says, I'm the person that's going to make this change. With your help, we need to organize, stuff like that. Like, he's not just saying, like in the last campaign where he was kind of like, Clinton's not the person that you want. We need to think about these hard questions. He's saying, I'm the guy, kind of thing, right? Which shows that that's a very different approach too, because it shows that he's confident that there's a movement behind him that can kind of, you know, leverage that power kind of thing, right? It's not just him saying, I'm an interesting guy with some good ideas. He's saying, this is the time we could actually do it, which is a big change. Yeah.
I do remember him saying stuff in 2016 that was like, I'm the guy that can beat Trump. That was a talking point in his campaign. But I hear what you're saying, though. It's intensified, for sure.
Yeah. And I don't even, I think that, whether or not you support that, it's more kind of just, it's interesting because I see the same kind of confidence on the far left, activist left, where I just, just from, being online all the time, I just see thousands of accounts of people that consider themselves anarchists. And, the groups that I used to go to a few different like anarchist meetings kind of thing, like North American Anarchist Studies Network or something like that kind of thing, right? And there would probably be like a few dozen people representing the different movements and stuff. And the groups were very, very small. Like they were very, very small. And now I would say that it's like a sea change in that kind of stuff where just huge numbers of people are at least reading about the kind of stuff. I think that's really interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so do you feel pretty optimistic about the left? I think things have definitely gotten better over time, but I still feel kind of like it's not really going to lead anywhere, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you feel differently?
So, yeah, I feel it's funny. I feel happy that other people are happy. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I feel happy that they're going, like, I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat. I was watching, like, I went and saw that Midway movie today. It's about, like, the Battle of Midway in World War II.
Okay.
And it's funny because it's like a Chinese movie, basically. Like, it's, all the money is from China. And, it's about, they do treat the Japanese with a lot of respect in the movie because that's just, like, the heritage of the movie kind of thing. It's like a reboot.
Is it an American-made movie, though? It's like...
Yeah. Okay. It's got, like, Woody Harrelson in it and stuff. And it's Roland Emmerich is the director, and it's like a real movie, but it's all financed by China, I think, and it's also I call it a Chinese movie just because it's a little bit uncanny, a lot of it, like it's a little bit overproduced and a little bit. It just felt very kind of strange. And
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, and there's like inserted scenes where after the Doolittle raid, there's like they beach and they like go down and the planes crash in China, so that there's like a whole sequence of like Doolittle in China and stuff, right? So that like just so that you can tell that that's the basis of they probably shot a lot of other scenes that are inserted in the movie once it plays in China. So stuff like that. There's just a lot of things like that, and even the title cards were not really that well done. So I feel like they were also done in Chinese. So
some guy painting them on a cardboard crate or something.
But anyways, the point being is that it made me think for a while. I was like, there is this kind of new consensus on the left now that you hear a lot that we're headed for another crisis, like economic crisis is going to be a huge, like there's going to be another recession because, it's been over 10 years since the last one really took hold. And like, if it's cyclical, then there has to be another one kind of soon. Mm-hmm. But to me, I'm like, the thing that kind of hit me with that was like, I was like, wait a minute, like if that's true, then, and Marxism is also like kind of, there's also this constant drive towards war and stuff, right? Like there's this constant drive towards like cataclysm or something, right? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking like, man, it was funny because I was watching this and stuff, and it's in the movie, like China and the US are on the same side, right? So it's kind of like, that's kind of a subplot in the movie is kind of that China and US are on the same side in the war. And I was like, oh man, are we headed towards another war sometimes? Some of that I was kind of thinking that like, that's the thing is that people always say that in recession, you don't know which way it's going to go, right? You could go far right, you could go far left, you don't know.
Yeah.
And it could just be a centrist kind of management where it just keeps plodding on. There's no like impossible, it doesn't have to go to an extreme. It just, so people always look at that as an opportunity that like the crisis produces the opportunity. And I was like, there's also an opportunity here that things are just going to go really, really bad for everyone, even worse than they are now. And, like where conflict will spread much further than it has and stuff. And I mean, there's kind of been one-off kind of terrible terror attacks and stuff, but not like constant low intensity conflict in the West or something. Right. So I don't know. I just had this very, very foreboding feeling that like, yeah, that this could be a very bad. So like that's what I was thinking about, like the left and stuff, where it's kind of like exciting now in this period where it's this upward trajectory. But I think that, right now within the next year, we're going to have a situation where Bernie Sanders is going to have a decent shot at the nomination for the Democrats, and Corbyn is going to have a decent shot at becoming prime minister in Britain. Now, what happens if, statistically and just gut feeling, that's not going to produce a democratic socialist society within the next 10 years or something. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
probably the chances are something bad's going to happen to both of them. And even if one of them does kind of okay, it's not going to be the result that the far left wants, right? Like, it's not going to produce that,
They're not going to go more left. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if they change, maybe they stay the course and they stay good on all their promises. More likely they'll drift towards the center.
Yeah, like what's that saying that like success has 1,000 fathers, but failure is an orphan or something like that kind of thing, where like the second that there's any sort of thing, like say Bernie loses the nomination, say he gets like 20 or 30%, and then he helps nominate Warren or something like that, right? And then say Corbyn falls short in this election, the Conservatives win another majority or something like that. If that's what happens, that's when the recriminations come in. That's when all of the rot sets in to the left, and you're going to see a lot of, I think, internal debates that are moved to another level that will be difficult to sustain, because there's a lot running in the left in the United States and UK right now, basically saying, if we do it our way, we're going to win, right? Like that's the whole message, really. It's just, if we do it, if we have a social democratic party that, so both for 2017 in Britain and for 2016 in the United States, both of those campaigns had a bit of a dress rehearsal character to them, right? Where both Corbyn did pretty well compared to what they thought, and Bernie Sanders did pretty well. So there's kind of like okay, if we just keep doing what we're doing, we'll actually win. Isn't that amazing? And I think that if that falters, which it probably will, that's just, even if they get into power, the fact that you're just probably not going to get the result they want, that's when I think the whole model gets thrown out and they don't know what to do next, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so, I don't know, like Obama can do that, you know what I mean? Like he can kind of promise big and then pretty much come up short on every promise and people still give him a pass. But if you market yourself as some kind of like outsider that's going to fix everything and you don't, even Trump gets a pass on a lot of this stuff. Not as much, honestly, as Obama, I think he gets hammered a little bit more by his people that would otherwise support him. But yeah, it's just the deck's stacked against you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. Now, I think what probably end up happening, at least in one of those cases, is that there'll be really convenient excuses of why that didn't work out, right? Like it could be something like Bernie could get sick, or there could be a lot of different reasons, or maybe someone will betray them in a spectacular way, and parts of the Parliamentary Labour Party might break off, and then Corbyn doesn't have a majority, or it'd be that kind of thing. But I think that I don't know if that will actually work, because I feel like at the end of the day, there's going to be so much invested in these things producing positive results that there will be kind of a introspective period, which is going to be pretty hard to deal with for a lot of people, I think. Yeah. So
yeah, I think committed leftists will be okay with sort of creating that kind of narrative of excuses and stuff, but the people who are kind of like on board with Bernie insofar as they see him as a way to get like Medicare or whatever, that's not going to fly. I think people are going to see that as pretty weak and then look elsewhere.
But at the same time, I don't know if there's actually anything that, like someone in my position, all I can do is kind of just say that. That's what I think is going to happen.
Right.
I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, because I don't even know what they would be. It's like the same thing as I said about like how Bernie can't really talk about the CIA that much kind of thing, right? Like it's like, it's all this idea that if you just kind of go along with how things are going, then things might turn out well. So you just got to keep doing it. You can't really have him be up there being like, and then there might be a coup or something, like he can't get really into it kind of thing, or else like it just looks psycho to everyone. So I feel it's more just kind of like, yeah, that's that's the way the cookie crumbles kind of thing. Like you just
vote
you
for me
can't
and I'm going to
really-
get shot. That's how good I am.
yeah.
Yeah, and,
So-
and you don't want to discourage it either because you want, there's an outside chance that it all plays
Yeah.
out fine, and it's definitely the best thing going. So you definitely don't want to like do anything to undermine it, but at the same time you want to look at things critically and sort of think about the future. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And the other thing is that it's also because I've also kind of felt more doubtful recently about the sort of giant narrative behind it kind of thing, right? Like I understand, like, I kind of, like you said about like, it'd be good for the United States to have Medicare, and that helps in Canada too. And Canada has a lot of things that it could improve. And I think that it's, important because it's people that I know and stuff, but the quest part of it, I don't care as much about now. Like the we're building socialism kind of stuff. It's, I don't know. I feel a lot smaller than I did in some ways. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like I can only kind of chip in small things here and there. I can't like actually lead anything. So just kind of like, yeah, these are just some opinions that I have that I think are pretty good or something. So yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel, and I think that's a fairly healthy attitude to have about these things. I think it can kind of drive you crazy if you start to think of yourself as somehow like being able to influence things by screaming at people on social media or whatever. You know what I mean? Or even like becoming an activist and like, yeah, you could do good stuff there, but you're still just like a person or a small group. Like it's not gonna have the impact on like a massive social structure. Yes, you can build a mass movement, but you got to build the mass movement to have that kind of impact, and it's just not happening on that level,
Yeah, and then you can't. And even if that were the case, then you still can't like take credit for it anyways because it's millions of people. So
right, and at that
you
point,
can't
you're
like
just one person among millions. So yeah, just get in line at that point.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like there's certain sorts of associations and memberships and stuff that I can take on to sort of like take on small roles within those kind of broader movements or something like that. Like I could see that in the future of doing different things like that, but not trying to think in terms of, I don't know, maybe this is the Foucault side that I like this kind of stuff where he talks about like micropolitics kind of stuff where instead of thinking in terms of sort of like leadership of the masses or something like that, just look at your own life and what you can change in terms of relationships and stuff and how you're actually approaching people. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think there's a good thing to be humble about your time and place, like your position in history, and just to sort of understand what that is. And that doesn't always mean you get to be the hero. Sometimes it's just not a great situation and you just sort of live your life out like, most people have in human history. They didn't really participate in anything that had like world historical changes on,
Yeah. I think that's true also for religious stuff where I think that's one reason why you see people kind of tend towards maybe not extremism, but just kind of the belief that their own role within a religion is going to be the thing that changes a whole organization from good to bad or something, or bad to good, sorry. But like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I see that a lot with people that, well, part of it is just very straightforward, like some of the more liberation theology sort of stuff or far right sort of things where people invest their own role with giant changes. But I also think there's, I don't know, like you see that a lot in Catholic kind of things where people are trying to push the idea that there's some sort of resistance against the Pope or, like they're, different things like that where they're the ones that are going to be the, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to articulate it, but yeah.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It sort of gives a little bit of drama to things that really shouldn't be the point of why you're involved in some of these things in the first place, right? Like it should be a place that you go to get your drama quotient. There's plenty of places to get that elsewhere. You don't need to be making it up in these kinds of things.
Yeah. Well, it'd be like what Jules calls like the menu du socialism or something like that too, where like
that was actually my joke, but yeah.
Oh, it was yours?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I thought it was Jules. I'd been attributing that to him, so I'm going to have to go through all my old posts and edit them.
I'll ask for a check or something.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, okay, so let's move on to another topic. How about right-wing crackpots running the public discourse in Canadian media, and we can also address this to American media because it's pretty much the same situation there. So, what do we have to say about that?
Yeah, I don't think there actually are that many. I think it's kind of much more shunned in Canada than it is in the United States. It's much more like the Canadian media, a lot of the media just sort of wants to be American. Like they really love NPR and New York Times and stuff. And so the CBC really emulates that kind of stuff. The more commercial media tends to be more not apolitical, but it just kind of has that kind of attitude of almost like action news in the United States or something, where it's not that they're trying to make an argument that's right wing. It's just a lot of the time it's just that they are very, very corporate about how they go about things, and it's just kind of like that passive conservative ideology. It's not like so there's been attempts to make openly. I guess there's the one difference would be something like the National Post in Canada, where there was like a explicit attempt to create like a right wing national newspaper. In that, it's always been sort of like a money losing venture. I think it's not like actual. It's just trying to. It's just sort of like an ideological project that kind of gets passed on. But even then, it's not the exact same as the United States, because it tends to be respectable right wing kind of stuff. It's not like, like they're making the sort of pro market arguments all the time instead of, and they kind of tut against people who criticize free trade and all that kind of stuff. The major difference in the last few years really has been the spillover from the United States from Facebook and stuff like that, where you just have seen this huge change in the political culture of conservatives. So it's basically like how, the Trump people, or like what you used to call teacots and stuff. It's people that all of these memes are coming from the United States, and they're just being, or like France, and they're being repurposed for Canada. And so you do see like this spillover of different things, like the yellow vest movement and all that kind of stuff. But I've always seen it as a bit shameful. Like it's a bit like it's kind of sad. Like it's just it's never really gotten full traction in Canada. It's always been kind of a fringe movement kind of stuff. And it has influenced politics in some ways. Like it's influenced the conservative campaigns, and it created like a far right party which tried to shift the debate, but ultimately didn't win any seats in this last election. And yeah, the difference really is that I think, that the media is much smaller in Canada, and it's much more buffeted by the winds of the United States kind of thing. So I think there is a danger though, that especially after Trump, because Trump is associated with the United States in kind of this negative way for most Canadians. I would say like, 80-90% of Canadians don't like Trump kind of thing. That even people that are sort of modeling themselves on Trump in different ways tend to distance themselves from Trump specifically. So I think that might change over time, especially if the Republicans lose in 2020. You might see a shift towards, I don't know, a more unified North-South kind of culture, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think of a lot of that far-right media stuff. It seems like a good part of it doesn't really care about the politics. They just see it as a business. Like they know there's a market, so they're just providing what sells. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the Gavin McInneses and all those social media personalities like that one blonde girl, whatever her name is. I don't think they truly care about politics as such. I think they know they can sell this stuff, and that there's a market, and it's easy to produce. Like it's very easy to come up with that stuff. And honestly, there's a lot of left-wing stuff that's very similar in that regard.
Sure.
Like like Young Turks kind of stuff. Although I think they're sincerely interested in politics, but in that style, you know what I mean? I think there's stuff that's just easy to come up with a line on something, and just there's a certain demographic that wants to hear it, and you just supply it and you're good to go. And it doesn't really go much farther than that. I mean, obviously it does have its impacts on discourse and the politics and stuff, but I think a lot of it is just like the priority is the business.
Yeah, although I think in Canada it might be different, because the attempts to kind of monetize it as like projects in Canada have been pretty bad. Like they just really haven't. There's been attempts that sort of go, like there's like the Rebel, and that's probably is the most successful of them, and it's still not really that successful. And I think that like most of it really is not even, I'm not even sure if it's like directly monetized. It's sort of the way that I think of it really in terms of like how it's actually influencing the culture, and then stuff that's actually from Canada, not just from the United States. It tends to be things like Facebook posts that are like, do you think it's fair that refugees get free money or something like that kind of thing, like stuff like that, like just a meme that says something like that, and it's kind of like it itself is kind of in like in broken English or something like that. It's not really like it's different pages, like it's different pages that like it might be called like Canada Patriots or something kind of thing,
Yeah.
and it's not really. I mean, the idea is that some people have is that these are controlled by other things. I feel like a lot of them are just, they're sort of like autonomous projects of different far right groups, and then I think if you trace them back, a lot of them go back to sort of like far right Facebook groups. And so like there's different groups in, say, Quebec, which are like this kind of thing. They say like, did you hear that Muslims are allowed to pray in class now, but Christians aren't, or some of that, that kind of thing. Like just, it's like, it's fake news kind of stuff, but it's like these kind of things will get thousands and thousands of shares. There are Facebook groups for different far right groups now that are really quite dominant in different protests and stuff. Those groups have thousands of members. Like they really do have a lot of, and that's more kind of mass organizing kind of stuff than it is an actual business or something like that. Like there's people that profit off that, but I feel like a lot of it is just sort of like the medium kind of thing. It's like that's how they organize these things, is that these people share these kind of gotcha things that are just based on like fake things. Now, in the main difference, I would say, is that certain things like that are being weaponized by oil companies and stuff, which is very strange. But so like in Western Canada, and it's like an overlap between sincere anxiety about the economy because, hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost in the oil sector and stuff. So there's a lot of people that are just extremely angry about how the economy is going in Western Canada. And then there's overlap with the mainstream politicians who are saying, you're completely right to be angry at Liberals in Central Canada because they're screwing you over. And then there's this kind of dovetail with the oil industry saying that's why we need more support for the oil industry. And then they fund that a lot, right? So it is this kind of perfect storm where there's, just constantly, if you're on Facebook, you'll see memes that say things like, if Trudeau comes to Western Canada, we'll kill him or something like that, that kind of thing, like just, I don't know. I don't know if you've seen any of this at all, but I think I might have mentioned it, but there's this kind of Western independence movement kind of thing, which it tends to sort of flare up every few years, like every 10 or 20 years. And then it ends up changing how the conservatives orient themselves to the West, but it doesn't really go anywhere. It's more kind of like a symptom. But right now, there is this kind of huge push to, so, and Trudeau, after he was elected, his first thing was that he said basically was like, I hear that the West is angry kind of thing, and I'll build this new pipeline out there as fast as I can, whatever to
yay.
And, yeah. Well, they're not happy. They hate him just all the way. So they don't believe him.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very strange kind of, yeah. And that's the kind of thing that could easily spill over into anti-immigrant violence or something like that. Because it's all connected in people's minds. This idea that, the Liberals in Central Canada are all just trying to make the Muslims happy and all the immigrants happy instead of trying to actually create jobs for actual Canadians kind of thing, So, yeah.
I love this idea of Muslims being organized or potent in any kind of political way. Like, have you looked at the world recently?
Yeah.
Is that Western independence movement, is that a very conservative thing generally?
Yeah.
Because there's a movement in the Northwest, like the Pacific Northwest in the States, called the Cascadian something.
Yeah.
You're familiar with that?
Yeah. So, BC is a bit different because like British Columbia is a bit different because there is those kind of like coastal progressive kind of Seattle kind of progressive kind of thing, right? Like where you do have some liberal kind of people there. And then the interior of BC tends to be much more right wing. And then Alberta is just like, say in the last election, I think, I can't remember how many seats Alberta has, but I think one of them went NDP and the rest went conservative. And that one NDP person said already to the media that she's willing to join Justin Trudeau's cabinet and she supports the pipeline, which is just like, it's just, I don't know. That's unheard of in Canada, really, that kind of level of willing to cross your own party. Because that's like, I don't know. It'd be like more like it'd be like more like the UK, right, where it'd be like a Labour person saying they're willing to join the I don't know, like a Liberal Democratic government or something, like just individually, like against the party whip or something. And it's also a pretty good sign that the NDP is not really, the NDP itself pushes. It said that it would cancel the pipeline basically and stuff. So I mean, like at the federal level. So that anyways, it just shows that the differences within even the NDP across Canada because of these kind of issues. So yeah.
All right, should we get to the questions, you think?
Sure.
Okay. Let me open it up. Well, the first question that I see here is accusing us of being associated with the CIA in like a non-jokey way. So if they're listening to this podcast, you could get confirmation on that based on the first half.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so there's this Twitter account called Get Fiscal Brazil Fans or something like that, and it seems like they wrote in to us. So they said, by the way, I've written both He Who Dances for Silver and the Blonde Shakes questions for the last episode. I am part of the many Brazilian fans of the Dawn, so can you give a shout out for Brazil?
Yes, I will give a shout out for Brazil, and I also support Lula in the next elections that will come about soon. I'll have them orchestrated through the CIA. But I will encourage you to vote for PSL at the legislative level, which there'll be also elections that will be emergency called for that. And they're the good PSL. So yeah, they're better than the PSL in the UK. In the US because they are Trotskyist, and I'm a Trotskyist now.
It's pretty cool that the warm welcome that Lula's gotten on his release.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought he was sort of like disowned or whatever, but it seems like people are happy to see him.
Yeah, I saw someone quote Lula and say that that Bernie Sanders called Chavez a dead communist dictator once, and we were all like angry, and I'm like, this is not the day to get angry. This is the day to like feel good about something. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, here's another one for you, Donald. Have you read Leninism Under Lenin?
So I have not read Leninism Under Lenin. I've read bits of sort of similar books, I guess, about Lenin and stuff, but not, I haven't read the new one. So yeah, or like that one. So yeah.
Okay. So someone asked, what's the painting on the pod's Twitter cover image? So if they're talking about the logo, that is just from the book You Can't Win by Jack Black. That's the cover of the first edition. If you're talking about the header, like at the top of the Twitter thing, that's just like a default background that was on my phone or something like that. It's just some
Yeah.
pretty clouds. I don't know. It just seemed nice. So I kind of put it there as a placeholder, and then I grew to like it, so it stays. I thought it looked good. So yeah, that's the amazing backstory behind that. Someone here asked, did either of you ever get into the world of pickup artists? Yeah, that's something I haven't really paid attention to at all. I don't know. Have you ever looked at that?
I used to read all the posts about it, just the joking posts about it, but yeah, I never really, I'm not really a pickup artist myself, no.
Yeah, that's one of those things where I'm a pickup artist. I don't feel this way about, but things like Jordan Peterson and a lot of those kind of things that are like kind of like self-helpy type of things for like young men, I feel a little bit defensive about because people come at them so hard, and I feel like there's some good stuff to be gained from those things if that's what you need. Like, not obviously not all of it is positive, but there's just not a lot out there for people like that. Like I remember when I was kind of looking for things like that, what really struck a chord with me was like Patrice O'Neill and like his Black Phillip show and stuff like that. And there's very bad messaging in there, and I didn't really take any of that to heart, but just like the attitude that he had kind of like, helped me kind of get my self-esteem back up or whatever. So I feel a little bit like that one comic, like let people enjoy things. That's sort of how I feel about these things. It's like, this is like a phase. Some people have like a hard time, and this is the kind of stuff that helps them get through that, figure out what they're about. So
I feel like it's already mutated a few times anyways. So it's like, that was kind of funny maybe 5 10 years ago maybe or something. But now it's those communities have already splintered off into a bunch of different things, which don't even. So I don't even know if the core concept still really exists as much. I feel like those people have already, like the pickup artists kind of today maybe are more interested in things like taking chemicals that boost your brain power or something like that kind of thing, like they're already in all these other subcultures that have developed since then that kind of take different elements that were interested in those kind of things. Because like the pickup artist kind of stuff was sort of like a 2010 sort of thing, like, or just after, where it was this. It was funny because it was just people being buffoons and thinking they had these theories of like, how to totally control a woman's mind and stuff. But I feel like the people that were really interested in that kind of thing and didn't just pick it up, didn't really just pick it up for a while and actually like made it their identity, they became other things after that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They either went into men's rights activism or like the incel kind of stuff, which I don't even know if that's actually that big of a thing. I feel like there's a lot of like sort of like the mainstream versions of these kind of things would be like, I don't know, guys getting big beards and
yeah,
like, you know what I mean, like, and
watches,
smoking cigars and being trying to be like tough guys kind of thing or whatever. And that, maybe that's the kind of angle that comes from that. Maybe someone could prove that certain things like that came out of certain types of men's messaging or something. But yeah, that's the problem with any of these kind of online subculture kind of things that people talk about, is that by the time that like a lot of people, the mainstream is kind of criticizing it, it's already probably mutated into a few other things that are probably well beyond that kind of thing. Like people try to, I don't know, especially when it's hit the mainstream in terms of think pieces and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, then it almost doesn't exist anymore, and they're just kind of kicking around a ghost, basically.
Yeah.
So here's another question for you. Well, I guess it's for both of us. Hi, fellows. Have either of you read any of Wendell Berry's writing? And if so, what did you make of it? Particularly, Don, I would like to hear your views on his thoughts on the crimes of big agriculture in the U.S. and the inherent dignity of manual labor. Thanks. Love the pod. XOXO. So I have not read or even heard of Wendell Berry. So
no, I have no idea who that is. Sorry.
All right, well, we'll look into it, I guess, see if we got anything about that. Another thing here is just an FYI, all the questions you think are automated are me asking dumb, non-original things because I'm bored. Sorry, dogs. That's okay. That's what we're doing here, too, saying dumb, non-original things because we're bored. So we're in the same boat, no worries.
Yeah.
Have you guys looked seriously into each other's religions? Can you imagine what it would take for you to change over to the other's religion? So I think you've probably looked into Islam more than I have looked into Catholicism. I try to be open and stuff to looking into that kind of thing, but I've just found what I have wanted out of religion in Islamic stuff, and I just kind of feel at home with that sort of thing. I have read some Christian writers, and they're not maybe the most orthodox or whatever, but like Meister Eckhart and Thomas Merton, and Tab's actually got a copy of the Desert Fathers book that you've been talking about, Don, from the library recently. So she's been reading that, and she's kind of read certain things from it to me, and a lot of it is astoundingly similar to the kind of stuff that I've read in Islamic texts. Like, you expect a certain similarity, like especially considering how close the two religions are, but like it's quite remarkable how similar like a lot of the specific messages and advice and even the stories and the way things are phrased. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, I think there is that, the religious studies people call it like wisdom literature, which is very, very like common to a lot of different religions, I think.
Yeah.
And I think that's almost what interests me more than I think that the other stuff is kind of important, but I think like the insights and sort of like, I don't know, like the cosmic sort of mystical kind of side of it is more important to me than it. I think that it's true because of that, but I also think that like, if I could be, I'm open to being surprised in different ways. That's the thing, right? I don't like rule out anything really at this point, just because I've been so surprised throughout my life. So I'm not like, I do have that kind of impulse that you do too, in the same way that it's like I've sort of figured out what I think is true, but I'm not like, I could be astoundingly wrong again or something. It's not like, I don't
Sure.
know. Like, I think that, that's possible. And the other thing is that, I think that there's also, that kind of light perennialist kind of stuff we were saying before, where I think it's less likely that I would transition from one religion to another kind of thing. I think likely that I just sort of, like there's a author, I think her name is Karen Anderson. I think that's her name.
Oh, Karen Armstrong?
Armstrong, right? Yeah, Armstrong. This, this idea of, she calls herself I think it's like freelance monotheist or something like that. Something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
I think that would be sort of closer to where I would go, is kind of like this, I think just maybe like a deeper version of perennialism or something, where I would be like, oh, I think that'd be the most likely thing than converting it. I think it would be more likely to gain more respect of something as being true in its own way or something like that. I think that's the more likely kind of thing. Yeah. But there's a lot of things that sort of speak to sort of like perennialist kind of things in Catholicism that I've been learning about recently, which I think are interesting, like stuff about the Holy Spirit operating as wisdom in the world or something, or the idea of, I read something that recently that was explaining about how Jesus, before he was born, existed in the world as like logos, whatever. Like, what, I don't know. I don't even know how to say that word. Logos.
I think that's right. Logo. Yeah.
Logos. Yeah. And that he existed in the world before that as logos, and as before his birth. And then so stuff like that, where it's this idea that it's almost like it's like divine reason or something kind of thing, right? Like, it's like that kind of thinking is interesting to me too. So I feel like if that's true in some ways, or at least like, analogous kind of things, then that's much more important to worry about sort of like right behavior and all that kind of stuff, instead of, or right like witness or something to the divine, than it is to be as worried about the outward kind of thing. Like, I almost feel embarrassed to even talk about this kind of stuff online, kind of thing, like as a joke here and there, about like all the cultural kind of identifiers. I do it because I think it's funny, like little things about like the Church of England saying like give their church back to us or something like that kind of thing. I think it's funny, but it's it feels like so childish compared to the actual religion. It's like, and it really makes me almost nervous about people that really invest a lot in that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I feel pretty similarly about the kind of like the idea of like crossing lines to adopt like a different position that's like sectarian in some way. Like that seems kind of ridiculous. Like, if I was going to cross a line, it would be in a porous way. Like, it would be maintaining what I have, but like expanding that beyond, you know what I mean? Instead of like just moving into a different camp.
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying. Yeah, the stuff you were saying about Jesus, that's not even, it's interesting to me. A lot of people seem to have the idea that in Islam, Jesus is like, quote, just a prophet or something, as if that's like not, as if that doesn't really mean anything, because I think the idea of prophets are kind of downplayed in Christianity compared to how they are considered in Islam, where that's as close as you can get to like a God on earth kind of a thing. So I believe this is correct. I would want to double check this, but I believe it's in the Quran or Hadith that Jesus is actually referred to as the Word of God. Like, that's a term that's used to describe him. And it also talks about him speaking at when he was young, and then also when he was older. And I don't know. I just think that kind of stuff you can find ways to combine the understandings in a way that doesn't really negate the other. Like, you can kind of presume that like if there's these two traditions, that they could mesh in a certain way. And I'm not saying like just combine them and have like a new religion that's like a combined thing, but you can understand that tradition through your own without needing to take something that's like flatly contradictory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that assume that the contradictions, either one's right or one's wrong, or maybe they're both wrong, and that there's some kind of like third position that you would understand if you had like a deeper spiritual understanding or something like that. You know what I mean? That kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see myself converting out of Islam anytime soon. I think that's just kind of what makes sense to me. There is a part of me that does kind of wish that that I was just like Christian, just because that's like my cultural background. It would just sort of,
Yeah.
I don't even know if it would make things easier, but it would just be less goofy or something. Like it would just
Yeah.
be easier to explain to people or something. But it is what it is. I'm not too pressed about it. It's all good. So
It's funny that you say that though, because I actually feel more and more now that I've thought about it too, is that I don't really feel like, because I was atheist for so long, I don't even feel like it is my tradition in some ways. Like it is, but it's also like it's funny because when I hear people criticize religion, which I mean you still do obviously all the time, you hear that people saying different things or people sending messages critical or whatever. I don't feel like I feel like there's some relationship there in my mind where I have to defend myself at a special level because I had the experience of not believing it, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's almost as if my natural religion is not to have religion, and then I have adopted this religion, so therefore I have to defend myself against those people. It's not like there was an interruption with the religion and then, resumption kind of thing. It feels like there's obviously like a very deep sort of culture in our tradition kind of thing, like in the world, I mean, of like, atheist kind of jokes and stuff and just assumptions that people have about the arrogance of religion and stuff. And, every time that I sort of experience that again with people, it really takes me off guard for a minute, kind of thing. Like I get really confused for a second because it offends me. You know what I mean? It surprises me that it offends me. Like I go, whoa, wait a minute, kind of thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, why, So it's very strange. Yeah. It's I don't know how to explain that, but it's just it's kind of a new feeling kind of thing or something where, yeah, it's a very strange feeling to feel like you're defending something that before you used to think was stupid or something kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah. So.
yeah, I know what you mean. I can kind of relate to that. I sort of feel the same way when I hear like atheist stuff. And I think part of why that bothers me, I mean, it doesn't bother me in the sense like I personally get upset or something, but because it's so like hateful and stuff, that just seems like really off-putting, and you can kind of see how that plays out in really bad ways, like especially against Muslims. Like when people attack Islam, it's not just like, oh, I think that's stupid. It's like providing fuel to potentially threaten people's lives or to disrupt their lives in really terrible ways. So that just kind of bugs me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let's go on to another one here. How do I tell all these bitches that I'm married without breaking their hearts? I don't know, wear a ring? Isn't that what people do? That flash a ring? I don't know. Today I was on the train and I was sitting in one of those seats that is facing inward, and most of the seats are facing forward. And there was a girl sitting on the seat like across from me facing forward, and at one point she just turned towards me and like smiled, and I just kept like a stone face to kind of like be like, no, no thanks. So that's what I do. I don't know if that's a good way to do it without hurting someone's feelings, but that's my move.
Yeah. Just shout "not today, Satan" at women.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think women will get the idea pretty quickly, no matter what you do, if you just don't engage. So
yeah, they tend to be
wily.
yeah Guys tend to be taught to like just keep going for it, like you gotta push through and everything. But like with women, they feel even a second of resistance and they will start crying. So you just gotta give them a reason to give up.
Yeah. So if you can make women cry on the train, then move on with your day. That's the best, I think. Yeah.
Okay, let's do one more. Okay, for Tom, as a longtime lurker, I've already converted Donald to be a Packers football fan. Will you join the movement or be destroyed? I have not been able to get any interest in football, so yeah, sure, I'm a Packers fan. You got me, but I'm gonna be the most like disinterested Packers fan. I don't care. I'm in Chicago though. I can't really be a Packers fan without that's dangerous around here. So yeah, I probably can't. I'll be secretly not rooting for you guys, but yeah, that's Yeah. Football
Okay.
to me is like, it's so, it seems like such a bureaucratized sport in the way it plays out. Like there's all these little technicalities and it just like stop and go all the time. It's so boring. Half the game you're just watching them like stand around waiting for the play, and then it happens and it's like a split second. It's cool to watch the highlights. Like I think that's fun, but the games are boring. And I mean, I'm a baseball fan. I can sit through like a long game. It's a different pace. I think like I can watch a baseball game and be totally riveted the whole time and everything, but
Sure.
it just doesn't work for me with football. So I don't know.
Yeah, I forgot I promised to be a Packers fan, so I haven't really been cheering at all. But I don't even know how they're doing this season. I haven't like watched or thought about any of the games, so that's a concern. But I might have to. I don't know. I also cheer for the Eagles sometimes because I know some people that are in that region, and they demand that I say "Go Eagles" ever so often, and then I say it. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Seattle and the Seahawks got into the Super Bowl and suddenly started being good and stuff, and then everyone suddenly became a Seahawks fan, and that just seems so obnoxious to me. I don't think I could ever be a Seahawks fan just because of seeing the fair weather fan thing happen. So sure, you got me with the Packers. I'm in. I'm never going to watch a game, but you got me.
They're the team that are like owned by or unionized or like owned by the team or something, owned by the city.
Oh God, is that what that's about? Oh Jesus.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's never mind. I'm out. That's stupid. I'm not going to support a team because it's some leftist thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that should wrap us up for this episode. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. You can hit us up on Twitter and send us more questions at YouCan'tWinPod. You can send it to us on Curious Cat there. And you can subscribe to the Patreon and get access to the Discord, chat with our community, and send us questions and topic suggestions in there. And we will catch you next week. Thanks for listening.